Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible testimony of Bill Vincent from Revival Waves of Glory Ministries, drawing from his powerful book, Revival Unleashed. And it all kicks off with a really thought-provoking idea. Imagine this, a minister who's constantly on the road, speaking to crowds big and small, basically living the life of a successful traveling preacher. But then, he looks back on all that activity and calls those his dead years. How is that even possible? Well, that paradox is exactly what we're going to get into. It's a journey from just going through the motions of religion to having a real, powerful, life-changing encounter with God.
Wow. I mean, that's a pretty shocking thing to say, right? A life that looks so full on the outside, packed schedules, nationwide travel, speaking engagement after speaking engagement, but feeling completely empty on the inside. How can a life so full of constant motion feel so dead? This one quote right here, it's really the key that unlocks this entire story. It sets up this incredible tension that just keeps building and building until, eventually, something has to give.
All right, so let's rewind the clock a bit, back to 1991. This is when Bill Vincent first started preaching the gospel. And his ministry didn't just kind of grow, it completely exploded. We're not talking about a slow and steady build here. It was a whirlwind of non-stop activity that put him in front of all sorts of people all over the country. From the outside looking in, you'd think, man, this guy has it all figured out. He was doing the work, he was making a name for himself, it was the picture of a successful ministry.
And this timeline really puts that whirlwind into perspective. Just think about it. Within 7 years, he goes from starting out to ministering all across the entire nation. And look at the range of audiences. You've got a picture of what that life was like. One night, you could be in a quiet living room sharing your heart with just 3 people. And then, maybe the very next night, you're standing on a huge stage, looking out at a sea of over 1,000 faces. It was a life of just constant movement, constant adaptation, a truly relentless pace. And if you really want to understand the intensity, look at this number, 25. In some months, he was ministering 25 different times. That is almost every single day. Can you even imagine the logistics, the travel, the exhaustion, the sheer amount of energy, physically, emotionally, spiritually, that requires? One night you're in one state, the next you're halfway across the country. Externally, it was this non-stop cycle of ministry and travel that just screamed success. But inside, a very different story was taking shape.
And here we get to the heart of the problem. This is the crucial insight. With all of that external success, something just felt deeply wrong to him on the inside. He described it as just doing church, going through the mechanics, preaching the sermons, holding the services, but that true, vibrant spiritual fire just wasn't there. He knew all the right words, he knew all the right things to do, but it had all become a routine. It was religion, a system of actions, not a living, breathing relationship. It was a ton of motion, for sure, but it was motion without any real meaning.
A pace like that, feeling that empty, it just can't last forever. Something has to give. And by 2008, after years and years of this, everything came to a head. A deep, profound sense of desperation started to set in. And this wasn't just, a bad week or a moment of doubt. This was a soul-level cry for something, anything, that was authentic and real. He had finally reached the absolute end of his own strength and the end of his own religious routine.
Man, can you feel the raw honesty in that prayer? That is the sound of someone who is completely at the end of their rope. It's not a polite request. It's a demand born of desperation. It's this total rejection of the same old. The very thing that had been his entire life's work, preaching, had become a dead sermon to him if it didn't have a real, tangible connection to God's presence. He was just done with performing.
And he wasn't asking for just, a little inspiration to get him through. He was desperate for something tangible. Something he could feel, something fresh, straight from heaven, every single time he got up to speak. That routine had become absolutely unbearable. He got to the point where he thought, if God doesn't show up in a real way, I just don't want to do this anymore. And yet, day after day, he'd pray this and feel absolutely nothing, which you can imagine just made him feel even more desperate.
And after all of that pressing in, all of that desperate seeking, all those prayers that felt like they were just hitting the ceiling and falling right back down, it happened. That one day in 2008 became the absolute dividing line in his entire life and ministry. You could say everything that came before was just the setup, because everything that came after was going to be completely and utterly different.
So what exactly was this real encounter? The way he describes it is like being born again, but again, this time it wasn't just about accepting the idea of salvation in his head. This was about being born into a real, tangible, living relationship with God. He says the presence of God literally fell on him in a way he had never, ever known before. Even after all those years of ministry, prophesying, seeing healings, this was something fundamentally completely new.
Now, this right here is so interesting because it reveals this profound shift in his entire understanding. For all those years, he thought his spiritual journey was all about his effort, him trying harder, him working to press into God. But in that moment of encounter, he had this incredible aha moment. The truth was the complete opposite. It was God who had been pursuing him, pressing into him all along. What a game changer.
Okay, so this huge personal transformation happens, but it wasn't just some private internal event that stayed with him. Oh no, it had immediate, explosive, and very visible consequences for his ministry. The dead years were officially over, and what came next was a period of life and growth and divine power that he had never seen before. And this encounter completely redefined what church even meant to him. He draws this really sharp contrast here. On one side, you have the complacent church. It's content with its own services, its own programs, it's focused inward on just feeding itself. But then you have the revival church, and he sees this as a dynamic, powerful force that's meant to get outside its four walls and actually impact the world by reaching the lost and transforming lives. And, well, the results really do speak for themselves. Before this whole encounter happened, his local church was made up of just 12 faithful people, a small committed group. But after the encounter, within a matter of months, a powerful revival started that began drawing people from all across the nation. We're not talking about slow, steady growth. This was absolutely exponential.
You know, the incredible movement that started in those months is still going strong today. And this story we're talking about is really the foundation for all of the ministry's ongoing work. For anyone who's intrigued by this and wants to see what that looks like in action now, you can find out a lot more at their website, revivalwavesofgloryministries.com.
So let's just break down what happened next. Within 6 months of that personal encounter, boom, revival breaks out. And listen, this wasn't just some weekend event or a special conference. This was a sustained move of God that went on for over 2 years. It drew so much attention that other ministers and even TV crews started showing up to see what was going on. And when people asked why, what's the secret? The answer was always simple. God's presence was just tangibly there. People were experiencing it for themselves.
This revival wasn't just about packing out one church building. It was about birthing a whole new vision for what the church itself is meant to be. The whole idea was to move beyond these static buildings and predictable Sunday services, and instead to become this dynamic, world-changing force that actively breaks down the old religious barriers that have held people back for so long.
And this new vision is all about action. It's about being pioneers, people willing to break new ground, not settlers who are just content to stay where they are. The goal isn't just to have a nice service, it's to lead people into real freedom and a deep intimacy with God. It's about moving far beyond routine and encouraging every single person to seek that same kind of authentic, life-changing encounter that he had.
A huge part of this vision is intentionally tearing down the walls that have divided Christians for centuries. He mentions how, back in the day, the very first question he'd get from other pastors was always, "So, what's your denomination?" But in this new move of God, things like denominations, man-made traditions, religious labels, and all those self-important titles, they're all starting to become irrelevant.
And this quote just boils it all down perfectly, doesn't it? The focus is shifting away from your institutional identity, which box you check, and it's moving toward a personal living relationship with God. It's not about what you call yourself or what building you go to on a Sunday. The real question is, do you actually know Him? Have you experienced His presence for yourself?
Now, it's really important to understand this isn't just a history lesson. This whole story isn't about something that just happened in the past and it's over. The core message here is that this same spirit of revival is stirring right now, that things are shifting the spiritual atmosphere and that we could be on the verge of another powerful wall-breaking move of God.
So this whole journey, from a ministry that honestly felt dead to a nationwide revival, was fueled by one simple thing: a radical shift from empty religion to a real relationship. If that message resonates with you, that idea of breaking down barriers to seek a real encounter with God, you can learn a lot more and see what the ministry is up to today by visiting revivalwavesofgloryministries.com.
And that really brings us to the final, challenging question that this whole story leaves us with. It kind of shifts the focus from his story and puts it right back on us. It asks, are we willing to lay aside our own comforts, our traditions, our expectations of how things should be? Are we truly ready to be used by God no matter what it looks like or where it might take us? It's a powerful thought to end on. Thank you for listening to the Deep Dive Podcast.